Good morning, everybody. I'm not a very morning kind of person, so that's my first excuse. I'm also not, well, I didn't sleep very well. That's my second excuse, because I had a barbecue last night and it was a bit late due to the good weather. And the third excuse might be that we had indeed a long season, so that tiredness is a bit in our system for the moment. Apart from those excuses, I will try to tell you some things about Beursgaburg in general, how we changed a lot of things, and how this could be connected to revolution. But let me start from the start. So Carmen asked me, yeah, maybe a month ago, if I would be ready, willing, and able to talk about revolution from a cultural perspective. And I thought, like, yeah, but I don't have anything to do with revolution. I don't see the link. So, as everybody who is helpless, I decided to Google the solution. So I typed in my own name, Tom Bonte, and I typed revolution. And the first image I got is this one. It's not me. And it's a man holding an iPad with a score. And that's how far I got with Google. So from this point on, there is no help anymore from the websites. There's no help anymore from Google. I will try to tell you something beyond that point. I would like to start with some very brief history of my own way through the cultural field, or my own way through the professional life since 2000, that is in my case. Because I studied in the University of Leuven, and I studied there art history. Well, to be very official, it was called art science at the time, but I still think art is not a science. It can only be or contemporary or history. So at that time, I was really not into contemporary art. Believe it or not, I was very much fascinated by medieval art. And this painting, which dates from 1470, 1480, if I'm not mistaken, was the whole topic of my thesis at the time, writing about relationships between Flemish primitives and German primitives. I will not go further into detail there, but of course, for the questions later on, I can explain you everything about this painting. After my studies, which was more focused on art as an object, I had the opportunity of working in a very big arts institution in Antwerp, which is called The Singel. I guess some of you know it. And it's also the moment that I realized for myself that I didn't want to work with art objects, but I wanted to work with people. And everything in this talk, everything that I will try to explain or try to tell where it comes from, probably has its base there, that I'm not really interested in art objects, but I'm interested in people and in relations between people. But of course, that's also part of what art can do. After The Singel, which was my home base for 3.5 years, where I was the assistant to the programmation of theater and dance, I had the chance to move to a really great venue in Ghent, another city here in Belgium, where I worked for almost 7 years in another art center, which is also, well, quite big, I would say, called Vooruit. It's a name that is almost as hard to pronounce as Beursgaburg. And Vooruit is an art center which in its size is much bigger than this one, but it's also the place where I kind of learned the tricks of my trade. It has a very mixed offer of art forms and really pushes the borders of what art and the mixture of art can be. So I was very much interested in that, and I think everything that I'm doing here, well, to a certain extent, is also using that model of Vooruit to use it here in Börschauburg. And then we come to this venue that you all know. You're sitting on the top of it. Börschauburg, which has a long history. I don't have to explain that to you. If you really want to know that history, I'm doing some promotion on the site. We made a book. And the book is about the whole history of Börschauburg of the last 50 years. In that sense, I'm proud to say that Börschauburg is the oldest art center, or almost the art. It's for sure the oldest art center on the Flemish side, with its 50 years, as we are about to end the celebrations now. When I started here, well, there was a lot to say about the position of the house and the dynamics of the house. But before going into that, let me jump to this idea of revolution, because that's where my hard part of the talk starts. That is that I asked myself some questions recently, and it's questions that are rising in the arts field very often, is the very general question of, can art save the world? And there's very different answers to that, but my answer is very clear, very simple, and very short: no. Then there's another question which says, can art change the world? And there my answer is very short as well. It's also no. But I do believe that people can change. So in that sense, if people can change, and art can really change people, then there is some hope in the purpose of art. Then the second thing, and maybe now after I've said this, you can all leave and enjoy the sun, because I also have a problem with this idea of revolution, because I don't believe in revolution. I think revolution is not something very sustainable. That's yeah, it's something which is going from one position to the other in a probably too quick, too fast, with too little thinking. So I believe in evolution, which makes this talk, of course, much more boring. On the other hand, what I do think is that starting from where people come into the picture, that people can provoke small-scale revolutions. And I prefer to talk about small explosions rather than revolutions. So I think if you would consider us as... Oh, I'm talking too much and using too little slides here. That's a slide, though. I use this image of to compare it a bit. It's an engine. But for people who know a bit how an engine works off a controlled series of small explosions, basically. And that's what I think happens when you have a lot of people provoking small explosions, their own small revolutions. So if everybody in a system, it being an art center or whatever that you want to make a change, adds their little small explosions to it, then you get this kind of system of the engine, the combustion engine. And as you know, with a combustion engine, you can drive forward, or you can even decide to go backward also. And that's probably the main idea here, that since I'm here, we tried to provoke small explosions, small people-driven ways of changing things, sometimes very subtle, sometimes a bit bigger, but never revolutionary in itself. But maybe the adding up of all these different explosions might be a bit of a revolution, or at least a strong evolution. My role in that is very simple. I think me as the director of this house, I'm just basically trying to control the explosions so that it keeps to be an engine and it's not something that explodes all the way. In that sense, I quote this one: which is very known, but at the same time very relevant. The revolution will not be televised by poet, musician Jill Scott Heron. If you don't know it, Google it, I would say. It's a poem, but it's also a song which, well, in this case could be referred to as, indeed, it's nothing that comes top down. It's not something that you can make a film of and then there will be a revolution happening, or it's not something that is just cinematically framed. It's something which really absolutely comes bottom up. I strongly believe that. And in that sense, we could quote Jill Scott Heron here. Okay, let me go to this case study. I'm not going to bother you with other case studies than the one I'm living in now, working in now, and that's Beurschouwburg. But to talk about Beurschouwburg, of course, we have to talk in the first place. Yeah, that's part of my team, in fact. That's what I wanted to say is, so this is part of a team that can create explosions. It's part of my own team. When we had this action for FM Brussels, the radio station, that we used ourselves explicitly to ask everybody involved there to rethink their position on the stopping of this radio station. But these people are also very important. There's more. They're not on the picture. This is just a random picture that I found quickly. Yeah, those people make this revolution happen. On the other hand, apart from the people that are people working here, do not underestimate the audience as part of the engine or as part of the explosions. I do think, in fact, that very often art centers do underestimate their audience, or at least do not use or do not make use enough of their audience, because they're the ones who in fact change the whole model, because your attendance here makes it possible to go on, to create more things, to be supported. You can hardly believe how the attendance of an audience pushes the people who work here to even go further. This said, Beurschouwburg, if we want to think of Beurschouwburg and how it has a long history and what were the problems and how things have to change and what our answer was 4 years ago to the quite difficult position we were in, you cannot answer that question without thinking of the context. So that's why I start with a map of Brussels to talk a bit about the changes that we found important for the development of our house. First of all, Brussels changed dramatically demographically. There's a lot of very young people in this city, and that's absolutely great, but there is, there's some challenge there, of course, but it also fitted our purposes very well, because the idea was that we wanted to work, and we were already having a long tradition in that, but we wanted to reinforce this idea of working for young people. And as this market, if you want to say it in economical terms, was growing, in fact, we could consider that we were hitting the right spot on that market and trying to focus on younger people. On the other side, Brussels has an explosion of languages and nationalities, which also is a challenge for every theater, for every art center. How can you reach all those, or as much as possible, all those people with those different backgrounds? I think it's possible with art, but not with every art form, so we also had to make choices there. And then there's a third one, which is a bit more internal, a bit more complex to explain. I will give it a try. That is that we had to look at the other venues that were a bit similar to us, theaters, concert halls, that kind of stuff, and see what they were doing in order to consider what is our position in there. If you're, at the time we were kind of a bit lost, our position was not clear anymore, so the point was, okay, what's the frame we're working in, and how can we be singular again? How can we be particular in that context? And I saw a lot of theaters and centers working around a seasonal program, which means that they start their program somewhere in September, and then they have a booklet made, and it goes all the way till June, which is something that is absolutely great. It's handy, and it's for sure handy for people who have a family life with kids, and they have to plan far ahead. But as I said, we're living in a city where a lot of young people live, where a lot of people live in, single living people, I would say, people who live on their own. And they don't need this kind of far ahead planning. They don't need this idea of wanting to know now already what they will gonna do in May 2016. I mean, I don't need it. Probably a lot of you don't need it either. So the idea was, why do we always create the seasonal programs if in fact our life is not organized like that? So that was one idea. Maybe we should skip this idea of the seasonal programs. And the other one was something that I took from my life when I was still working in Ghent in Vooruit. That was that I wanted to stop working in the festival format. On one hand, because the festival format itself was something very popular in the 90s and the 2000 area, where a lot of art centers found this a good way of attracting new audiences, because it was it was something special. It was something for 10 days you could come and visit a program that was out of the ordinary. But it was kind of a mushroom thing. So there was a lot of festivals arising, and there were so many mushroom festivals popping up that in the end there was nothing special about it anymore. The festival had kind of imploded in its value. So when I came here, and I was guilty myself, in Vooruit I organized a lot of festivals. But when I came here I thought, like, this makes no sense anymore. There is no festival to add to it. There is no exclusiveness in that anymore. So we decided, there were at the time when I arrived here 5 or 4 festivals, to also cancel the festival format. Apart from some smaller formats that we kept, we really cancelled a lot. Then the question is, of course, now I told you, okay, this is what we're not gonna do. We don't want to have a seasonal program. We don't want to have a festival. And the thing we put in between is nothing of a revolutionary kind of proposal, but it was something that worked very well and that was open enough for everybody to contribute to it. And that's what we call focus programs. They're basically the idea, they're combining the strengths of a festival with the strengths of a season. It means that we can program a bit further ahead, meaning 2-3 months ahead, and that we use the idea of a festival that we work topical, thematical, which is very often the case with festivals, that you have a festival on sustainability or a festival on this or a festival on that. So we used this combination of the two, and that worked very well, I have to say. But I can elaborate on that later on if you want. Other change in this whole period of the last 10 years in Brussels, but in the world in general, is the arriving of the digital era. I find and I found and I still think that there's a very little art centers, very little theaters that are aware of this revolution. It sometimes feel like they're still working with booklets, which is something that might add up to it, and they make programs that are being printed. But the main capacity we have today as art center is our communication through the social media. And I see a lot of art centers really struggling with that. When I arrived here, I have to say there was not really a policy around it. And I have to say that in 4 years we made huge steps in making our social media strategy, basically our main strategy almost, in the opening up of a program. And the last one is something that also has to do with this context, but is, I would say that also I see a lot of theaters and centers making a mistake in that they don't specifically bring people together. And then I come back to what I said in the beginning, it's all about people. That an art center sometimes loses its focus and is not investing enough in bringing people together, but they're investing in bringing artworks together. And I think that's a mistake. I think it is, in the first place, about bringing people together, and the artwork in itself is it's not in function of that. That's not what I want to say, but it's really what our purpose is, but it's bringing people together that makes the difference in this context for me. I will dive a bit into what I saw when I arrived here and how we put some answers to that. When I arrived here, that's in 2011, there was an artistic program, and that was made by one person. It was the artistic director, and he made the program, which can be absolutely great. In fact, it was great because he was a really good curator. but it was just one person. And I'm coming back to my whole metaphor of the explosions. If you have one curator, you create one explosion. So if you have more people involved in creating a program, you can create more explosions. And if you can create more explosions, this might be the start of your combustion engine that you want to have to go forward. So that's something we really changed. So from this one person, we went to a more open house with many activities. And I think Carmen also mentioned it, we were opening up to more than just art projects in itself. So we were trying to connect dots there. There was the coming in of CreativeMornings more than a year ago. There were collaborations with student organizations to go for Marché Vélo, for instance, a big bicycle market that we do twice a year. There was an event that we organized with Yelp. There was the Fuck Up Nights. There was Stadsalons Urbains. And I can continue like that. We had quite some interesting things coming from outside of the venue that were all tiny explosions. And the thing was, by opening up, we didn't have to invent everything ourselves. We didn't have to invent every format ourselves. I mean, I really accept that there is people out there who have smarter ideas than I have. The only thing, and that's my job, is to get them in here. And that's what we basically did, try to get a lot of interesting people that are working in this city context to bring their stuff here and add to this story and to this engine. Then I come to the choice we made also when it comes to the language borders that we are, well, often confronted with here in Brussels. That is that there's a lot of people with a lot of languages, and we're sometimes this Babylonic kind of city. But art can really bridge that, and that's why we chose from the start very specifically to invite artists who don't use language as their main form of expression, which means we use a lot of artists who have visual work. We use artists who start from another angle than the language as the base of their work. And it helped us a lot because this way we could go away from this classic idea of the Flemish theater bringing Flemish, or Flemish art center bringing Flemish theater plays to a Flemish audience. It was not exactly like that before, but we stretched this up and tried to get even more people in and try to reach the whole of Brussels. Everybody in Brussels could be welcome and could be interested. Of course, not everybody is interested, but that's like that in all things you do. Of course, maybe I didn't mention it yet, we also chose to go in art forms. We didn't choose from the discipline of the art form. We're not interested in the form of art that we're working in. So we choose for artists and not for the form of art they're working in. So you can bump into art forms like performing arts here, music, film, video, visual arts. We even made some books, not only that one, but also some artist books. We did some artistic guided tours. We did some interventions in the street. We did some city actions, and so on, and so on. And I think that's also very important, that we were absolutely not rigid about what art is. You could even discuss some things that were happening here had absolutely nothing to do with art in itself. We also said to ourselves, okay, we have to be, in the spirit of attracting young people, we want to be unexpected, we want to be, we want to keep surprises every time, which was very important to us. Apart from that, and I already mentioned it in certain examples that I gave, is that we accepted loss of control. It means partnerships where people bring in proposals that were not our own proposals, bringing in artists who could propose projects that were not theirs, but were bringing in other artists again. So it was not about our idea of the curator who is on top of the machine and decides everything that comes in. No, we opened up, and sometimes this led to beautiful surprises. Also, sometimes, we have to be honest, this led to disastrous catastrophes. But still, loss of control and accepting loss of control is quite fundamental. The other thing is something that I really consider something we do here, is that we take serendipity seriously. For everybody who knows serendipity, it's the idea of that you're searching for something and that you bump into something else. So you're searching a medicine for cancer and you invent whatever, a drink or whatever. You can, I don't make it. You see, that's the morning problem. That's the morning problem. The serendipity idea is very important in this house because we do such a large offer of what art can be, that the idea is that an audience member comes in to see a theater show, but before he reaches the venue where the theater play will be, he bumps into an art object that he didn't know but is maybe flabbergasted with or not at all. But this real idea of making an environment where people discover things without really asking for it. That was important too. I could even say that this idea of serendipity is something that we connected to the idea of social media. It's the same thing. If you're on your own Facebook's page and you're scrolling, you get to know more information about what your friends are doing, but you might also get to know more information about what the friends of your friends are doing without you asked for it. So this is also a kind of serendipity, you could say. You get to know things about people, about projects, about life in general, without really looking for it. Other thing is, and it's something that people laugh, well, people laugh when I say this, well, not you, I guess, but people, my colleagues, professionals, they laugh when I say take parties serious, because we do quite often some parties. But I'm really serious about that. I think you really have to embrace the idea that a place where people come together is a place where a party can happen, is a place where there is also some joy and fun. I was talking to an ex-colleague yesterday on the barbecue, and he was saying, complaining a bit like in the venue where he was working now, that there was lacking some fun factor. And I think it's absolutely necessary if you want to create an atmosphere where people are willing, able, and adventurous enough to come and see an artist that they don't know, that at least they go home and had some fun factor with it. Not maybe specifically with the art project itself, because it can be very serious or conceptual or whatever, or intellectually mind-blowing, but the context that you create should at least have some fun factor in it. I mean, what's the point if you go out and it's only intense and no fun? So that's why the bar of this organization is quite crucial and quite central. This is also change. When I arrived here, the bar had become kind of more of a foyer to the theater, something which was open before and just after the show. And now the bar is open again structurally from Wednesday till Saturday. This kind of, yeah, the beating heart of your art center. I could go on and on and on like that, but maybe I have to jump to some, to talk a bit about the audience maybe. Because when I arrived here, there was audience, of course, but there was not so much audience, and there was a passive relation to the audience. And yeah, you could say that for every explosion that the marketing or the communication team had to make, they had to go look for that specific audience again. We changed it, so we're very much audience-oriented now. And the idea is, and I think it's very basic, and I kind of already said it, is that we try to get people over here because they don't want to come specifically for one project, one explosion, as I would call it. They should be interested in the whole engine, and I think that's something that's more and more happening. People come here because they want to be part of that combustion engine, they want to create their own explosions in it, and they just want to be part of it. So that's why we created this environment. I don't think all audience members are always conscious of it, that they are a fundamental part of this new evolution. But they absolutely are, and it is us, we're not building really an audience. I think it's a mistake from our side to think that we're building audience. I think we're also trying to build a community, which is very different than the people who are just sitting on a chair and looking at a project. How did we get there? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why our audience numbers have how you say that? There's a lot of words for that word. Well, you got it. They rise, huh? So the audience is growing. That's clear. That's good. I'm very happy for that, of course. But there's a lot of reasons why we managed that. I think part is the program, no doubt. The program is still at the heart of it. On the other side, there's the context. We try to create scenographies. You will see it outside now. We have Out Loud. And so we also make a whole scenography out of Out Loud so that people see now is the time that we're doing this Out Loud program, and you can feel it in the look and feel of how the building is being designed for the moment. But also, and I think that's a very crucial one, is that we changed our tone of voice. And that's purely a communication thing, but it's a very important one. If you read the booklets of a lot of venues, but also from this venue, like before 4 years, there is a kind of seriousness in how they describe the projects. There's a sort of exclusiveness in how they describe projects, and there is always a tendency to being a bit of highbrow. I don't think that we should change the art. Huh? The art is the art, and I think that's at the center of it. But you can really change the communication about that art. It's our duty to make this bridge to an audience. So what we changed is basically also think from the bottom up, and the tone of voice became much more informal. Of course, using social media, your tone of voice anyway becomes more informal, but we did it also on our printed material. This way we build a community of followers in real and online, and we would talk to them like we would do at the bar. That's, I think, the main twist in our strategy when it comes to communication. So we're trying to communicate in a normal way, and that's not the opposite of highbrow, exclusive, serious, but it's at least inclusive. And I think that's again something that we found very important when we started this project. All right, I'm almost done there. The team, I would still say something about it. We shifted not so much in the team. When I arrived here, there was a good team and that was doing really good work, but we shifted something in the organization structure. It's a bit more technical probably, but it gave probably everybody much more clearer responsibilities, made a structure where people are really knowing what they are doing and what is their main job, and that's what we call written, it's like functieomschrijvingen in Dutch, written down function descriptions. And that's all clear, but it's of course also just paper. It's not because it's on paper that people will do it like that. But you can responsibilize them. That's one thing. And on the other hand, we also said people can also take up other roles in an organization, because you can be, I give an example, you can be a great programmer. I give it as an example. You can be a great programmer, and that's also your project, your function description. But on the other hand, you can be, for instance, also very creative, making a scenography. Well, in that sense, you can take up this role and say, okay, I will bring on this job to me. I want to make the scenography for a new festival that is coming up. Or designing it, maybe not executing it, but designing it. So this kind of roles people can take all the time, so it makes jobs challenging, so there's not something really fixed. I mean, yes, you have your main job, and you have a lot of roles around it. That said, I think that was the main frame of all the things we changed in the last 4 years. We changed some part of the team, we changed our approach to the audience, we changed the format of the program, not so much the content. I think the content is very similar to what was there before, but we changed really the formats of the program to end up where we are today. If I was talking about tone of voice, I give you some examples of the focus programs that we were doing. The first one we did, which was kind of very successful because it was the very first that we tried, it was I Fail Good, and it was a program on failure. It's there that we got in on the radar of fuck-up nights, because they thought like, oh, these guys are interested in failure, so maybe we should go and talk to them. So things are always connected. And I Feel Good was a nice program because it started bottom up again. It was a topic that was not coming top down, being, oh, we're going to talk about ecology, or we're going to talk about politics, or we're going to talk about the big issues. We didn't want that, and we're now more conscious than at the time, but we want to address topics that are human scale. Once again, it's about people, so we're trying to go for that approach, and I Feel Good was very much about that. It's about how we all know failure, but very little talking about it. And I have to conclude there. So that's what we use there, and we always use, talking about tone of voice, kind of quotes that we found inspiring. And this one for I Feel Good was, "I don't hate you for failing, I love you for trying." And the great thing was, it was a quote by Marge Simpson, which is in itself not even a real person, which I really liked. The other quote that we used for Transformer is here, but I see that you cannot really read it very well. Transformers was a program on change, in fact, and we used a quote by Coco Chanel. It says, "If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts." But in fact, the funny thing about it is, but nobody noticed, and this is something that I can now say to you, is that the quote, "If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts," is not a quote by Coco Chanel, it's a quote by Einstein. But we were allowed, because he said so. Well, this said, I thank you for listening. I hope it wasn't too boring, and have a nice day and a nice summer.